Last week, the U.S. International Court for Trade ruled that Donald Trump cannot just create an economic emergency where one does not exist. Therefore, he cannot simply declare an economic emergency, and therefore, he does not actually have the authority to just put these tariffs on every other country on the planet, and therefore, tariffs gotta go away. Within 48 hours, the Trump administration had, of course, appealed this ruling to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and that Court of Appeals issued an immediate ruling saying, whoa, 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 the tariffs can stay. So less than 48 hours after a court told Trump, you got 10 days to get these tariffs gone, the appeals court immediately said, nope, they can stay while this works its way through the appellate process, which could take a long time, maybe it doesn't. The Trump administration had already threatened to file an immediate, emergency filing with the Supreme Court to intervene if the appeals court did not rule in their favor. So the appeals court said, well, we don't want that happening. Let us go ahead and give you everything you want, baby Trump. So that way you don't throw a massive tantrum and go tell our mommy and daddy, the Supreme Court, that we weren't nice to you. This is absolutely infuriating. Let me explain to you what typically happens when you have a lawsuit involving a government policy. And we have seen this a lot down here in my home state of Florida, by the way. Here is what typically happens. When a leader, whether it's a governor like down here in Florida or a president, issues some kind of order, policy, proclamation, whatever, and they get sued for it. Typically at that point, the courts will put an injunction on it right away and say, listen, no, you cannot implement this policy until the lawsuit works its way through. Now that didn't happen with the tariffs. They were allowed to stay. But once the lower court issued that ruling, and again, we've seen a similar situation down here in Florida, we've seen it in other states. Once a lower court issues their ruling and says, nope, this can't stand, automatically that ruling is the one that takes effect. Which means upon the appellate process, the higher courts will not usually reinstate the policy that the lower court overturned. They will say, listen, as this works its way through, the policy is paused. Upon completion of the appellate process, should you prevail, policy immediately back in place. But for now, the policy is in fact paused. That is how these things typically work. So that is why it is a little bit mind-blowing that the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit immediately said, nope, tariffs are back. Don't worry, buddy. We got your back. That's not how this happens. The appeals court, without actually hearing the case, the arguments from both sides, effectively overturned the lower court's ruling. Which, again, is not even how the appeals process works. So this whole thing is a bit of a very odd, very out of place situation with regard to these tariffs being immediately put back on after being taken off. So I'm not sure what this Court of Appeals was thinking, but this is definitely not the way things usually work when you have lawsuits involving government policy. Thanks for watching today, everybody. And don't forget, if you're not already, please do subscribe to this channel. We have fresh content going up every single day, and I would really hate for you to miss out on that. And speaking of missing out, if you're not following me across all other social media outlets, then get on it. You can follow the links in the description of this video.